Merry Christmas! This is Chess Gym TV, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the ideas in the Caro Kann pawn structure. So after e4, c6, mainly for black, by the way, there are a few different ways that white can proceed. The most common is d4, and after d5, striking back in the center, white has three main tries to this Caro Kann defense. First is the advance variation. This is a very interesting way of white to proceed. Most common way is bishop f5, getting the bishop outside the pawn chain. So in this case, the pawns are fixed in the center of the board. So this is very interesting. Black's probably going to be playing e6 shortly. So after this, knight f3, e6, bishop e2. Black can play h6, trying to keep this bishop. At the moment, white cannot play knight h4 because of queen takes h4. So if black is going to play knight e7 at this point, then now white can play knight h4 trying to get this bishop, and black cannot play this h6 move because you would have to take with the f pawn, and that would be very awkward for black to deal with. So at this point, if white castles and black wants to play knight e7 right away, then maybe black can continue with h6. This gives the bishop a hiding spot at the h7 square. Most likely white isn't going to be going for that bishop anyway. So let's just say after c3, this is a more passive way for white to continue. Black's main pawn break, similar to the French defense, is this c5 push attacking white's center, and it's possible for black to completely go into a French style of a French defense type playing with this, maybe even instead of knight c6, knight e7, knight ec6, and then knight d7, something like this, and let the bishop stay on e7. Black usually castles in this position. Black usually castles kingside. If white is going to be doing a kingside attack, then maybe you'd want to reconsider, but usually the king is going to castle sooner or later, but it's probably best for black to get on with this queenside play anyway. I also find it very useful to play the move a6 at this point, keeping any white pieces out of this b5 square, because sometimes this knight, if you're not careful, this knight can end up on b5 and then jump into d6, and this is extremely bad for black without this dark squared bishop. So for example, if you've played knight e7, this knight is just going to completely ruin your game. So I find it very useful to play a6, also keeping from this bishop from coming to b5 and putting the king in check. So I find this a6 move very useful. Black is going to be playing on the queen side. For example, if these pawns are exchanged, black has this minority, this 2 pawns versus 3 pawns on this side. And it's very common in Caro Kann structures for black to end up with this 2 versus 3. And here you're going to be playing b5, let's say, if black is castled over here. You're putting the rooks on the b and c files and rushing this minority down the board, trying to provoke, I don't know, however you would do this, you're trying to attack weaknesses in white's camp. White has often played c3 in this kind of position, so you can exchange, and white has a very weak pawn on c3. So the idea here is you want to march these a and b pawns down the board and try and attack on the queen side. That is black's area of the board in the Caro Kann. In most, if not all variations, is black is going to be doing this minority attack on the queen side. Let's take a look at another example of this very good pawn structure for black. Set up back to the original position. Whoops. There we go. Alright, so we're back here. e4, c6, d4, d5. Another try for white is this classical variation. This is another very common variation you should be familiar with. After d takes e, knight takes e. Black has 2 main moves here. Bishop f5 is the typical variation. It's the one that I prefer. It gives black a bit more of a controlled game. But there's also knight f6. I'm not going to be focusing on this move. It's very interesting. Black gets the doubled pawns, and often black plays in the center or on the queen side, but It's a very interesting line. It's probably preferred by most top players, but I am going to be sticking with this bishop f5 move. After knight g3, attacking the bishop drops back. Knight f3, threatening to come into e5, so black plays knight d7 to stop that. And h4, threatening to trap the bishop, so black saves the bishop. If white can play h5 here, kick the bishop back, and then bishop d3, we're going to exchange the bishops. Black plays bishop takes. Or sometimes I have run into a few people who play bishop c4, but I don't think this is very good for white, because after e6 this bishop is looking quite funny on c4. And black's just going to be playing normal developing moves like knight f6, knight gf6. If you can, bishop d6. Bishop d6 is the best square for the bishop. You want to try and get this bishop d6 in before white has played bishop f4 and taken that diagonal away from you. So, the main way is bishop d3, and after the exchange of bishops, black plays e6. And now after bishop f4, the best move, taking control of the d6 square, stopping this, white can decide to castle queenside in this position. Because the h-pawn is quite advanced, white often tries to castle queenside and go for a kingside or a central attack. So, anticipating this, black plays queen check, checking the king. If c3, black has provoked the white pawn to step into c3. And then you continue with knight gf6. And the idea is, if white decides to castle queenside, which he probably is not going to do, well, he can't right now because of the a7 pawn, but the idea is you want to provoke some white pawns to advance on this side by using these checks. Another common is bishop d2, bishop b4. You provoke this c3 push, and after bishop d6, this pawn pushes again, queen c7. We've provoked this c-pawn to advance, and the idea is if white decides to castle queenside, black can immediately charge forward at these pawns, of these advanced pawns that white has pushed on the queenside, and black is going to get a very quick queenside attack. If you don't provoke this pawn to advance, this queenside attack is not going to work, so you have to provoke the white pawn to advance on the c. So you have to provoke, otherwise you aren't going to get the attack. And it's again a similar idea. You just have to charge forward on the queen side, try to open up files. And the last pawn structure that I'm going to take a look at is, is this pawn structure here, the exchange variation. Now I'm going to be talking about the exchange variation, not the Panov attack. So just this bishop d3 move. After knight c6 is better because you attack the pawn. c3, knight f6. Let's say knight f3. This is where you develop the bishop because you have to get this bishop outside the pawn chain. So let's say knight f6. Let's just say white castles over here, and e6, bishop f4. You can trade these bishops. It's probably good for black to trade the bishops because you develop the queen. And then yeah, this is a fairly typical position. Let's say some pieces are exchanged off here. Let's say somehow you get this. You get two pairs of minor pieces traded, something like this. Now the idea is, after black castles, this is just what you want to do. You want to castle kingside, and then once again we see this 2 versus 3 minority, and black is going to charge on this attack. So sometimes you can play a6 I recommend playing this a6 move, just taking control of the b5 square, and then you're going to play the rooks to b and c, and march this b pawn up the board and try to attack the weakened pawn chain. And if you can take, now this is a big weakness for white, so you can either play this and stick a knight in there. If you can trade knights, then you're going to want to stick a rook in here and pile your pieces on this file. So that's what you want to do there. And also, sometimes white can play this. I don't think this is good for white, but sometimes they can play this b4 move, trying to do something over here. I have run into several people who play this. Here you just block them with b5, and now there's this huge hole here. So you're going to play the rooks here. You're going to double here. Well, actually, you want to leave this c8 square, because you want to play knight e7 to c8 to b6. This is the idea. You want to get your knight to this b6 square, however you do it, because you want to look at these two squares. And then you can double, stuff your rook in here. Well, I mean, you know, it's going to vary depending on how you do this. If white's going to go into a passive mode like this, you can play knight a4 and attack this pawn. You double, you put your pieces on this file, and you're going to use this knight either on either of these outposts to pressurize white's position, and this using this minority attack. So always be aware of the minority attack. This 2 versus 3, you just rush down here and you use the B and C files to come after white's weaknesses. This is what I love about the Caro Kann, is the easy to understand middle game plans of attacking on the queen side. It's very good, and I highly recommend you play the Caro Kann or try it against e4. Thank you for watching. Merry Christmas and happy checkmating. I hope you learned something from this video.